Today we'll live through a knight's day in an English medieval castle. We'll learn why noble knights didn't bathe for months, how court intrigues were more dangerous than any battle, and what archaeologists find in secret rooms that clearly weren't meant for prying eyes. Yes, a knight's life was a privilege. A cold, dirty, and paranoid privilege. If you enjoy stories for deep sleep, subscribe to the channel and check out our other playlists. They feature tales from different historical eras. We're very curious where you're listening from and which era you'd like to hear next. We release videos every day and listen to your requests. Get comfortable. We're starting the journey. You are a knight in one of the most powerful castles in the realm. But here is what nobody tells you about this life. Knights spent less than 1% of their entire lives actually fighting. The rest? Paperwork, accounting, and dealing with toilets that emptied directly onto the walls below. The reality of castle life was far stranger, more uncomfortable, and more surprising than any legend suggests. Let us start with the morning. You wake up not to trumpets or heroic calls to battle, but to the sound of snoring. Lots of snoring. You sleep in the great hall with 30 other men, all packed together on wooden benches covered with straw mattresses. There are no private rooms. Privacy does not exist for anyone except the Lord himself. The man next to you has not bathed in 3 months. Neither have you. Medieval people believed that bathing opened the pores of your skin and let disease enter your body. Water was considered dangerous. Instead, you change your linen underclothes regularly and hope the fabric absorbs enough sweat to keep you tolerable. The Great Hall smells like a mixture of smoke, unwashed bodies, dog waste, and rotting straw. After a few weeks, you stop noticing. Your nose simply gives up. Here is something truly shocking. The castle toilet, called a garderobe, is literally a hole in the wall. A wooden seat with an opening leads to a shaft that goes straight down the exterior castle wall. Everything drops into the moat below or forms a disgusting pile at the base of the tower. Now imagine this during a feast when 50 people need to use the toilet. There is often a line. Some garderobes are placed side by side, separated only by a thin wall with no doors. You sit there doing your business while the person next to you does the same, and you can hear absolutely everything. Medieval people used moss, hay, or leaves as toilet paper. In winter, that moss is frozen. Think about that for a moment, but wait, it gets worse. The garderobe is usually located near the bedroom chambers because medieval people believed that the bad smells from human waste protected expensive clothing from moths and insects. That is why it is called a garderobe, which means clothing storage. So your finest tunics hang in a small room next to where everyone defecates. The smell is supposed to be helpful. This is medieval logic at its finest. Now let us talk about your armor, because maintaining it is basically a second job. A full suit of plate armor costs as much as a village, sometimes more than 10 villages. If you are lucky enough to own one, you spend at least 2 hours every single day cleaning, oiling, and checking every piece. Steel rusts incredibly fast in damp English weather. One day of rain, one night of exposure to morning dew, and rust spots appear. Those rust spots, if left untreated, can weaken the metal and kill you in battle. So you and your squire carefully coat every plate with a mixture of oil and beeswax. You check every leather strap, every buckle, every rivet. This is boring, repetitive work, but your life depends on it. One broken strap during combat means a piece of armor falls off, exposing you to enemy weapons. Here is what makes medieval armor truly interesting. It weighs between 50 and 70 pounds, but you can still run, jump, and even do acrobatics in it. The weight is distributed across your entire body, so it feels less heavy than carrying a backpack. However, wearing it for hours is exhausting. In summer, the metal heats up until it burns your skin through the padded underlayers. Knights have passed out from heat exhaustion inside their armor. In winter, it becomes so cold that touching the metal with bare skin can freeze you to it instantly. And if you fall into water while wearing full armor, you sink like a stone. Many knights drowned this way, unable to swim with 70 pounds of steel pulling them down. But here is the real surprise about being a knight. You are not primarily a warrior. You are a medieval middle manager. Most of your day involves administration, accounting, and bureaucracy. You oversee tax collection from nearby villages. You settle disputes between peasants. You inspect the castle's food supplies and make sure the grain storage is not molding. You check weapons inventories. You review the guard rotation schedule. You deal with merchants who want to pass through your lord's territory. Medieval knights were essentially armed accountants. Training still happens, of course. Every morning after Mass, you practice weapons in the courtyard. But this training is brutal and dangerous, even with blunted practice weapons. Broken bones, concussions, lost teeth, and permanent injuries are common. Knights regularly suffer head trauma from practice sessions that would horrify modern safety regulations. There are no helmets during training. You learn to fight by actually getting hit. Hard, repeatedly. Some knights develop serious brain damage from years of taking blows to the head. Medieval people do not understand concussions, so knights just keep training through the pain, accumulating injury after injury until some of them can barely think clearly. Here is a fact that destroys the romantic image of knights. Many of them were essentially licensed criminals. Knights were given the legal right to use violence on behalf of their lord. Some took this as permission to terrorize the countryside. Knights often engaged in what was called chevauchée, which sounds romantic in French, but actually means organized raiding, burning villages, stealing crops, and creating terror. This was not considered shameful. It was a legitimate military tactic and a way for landless knights to gain wealth. Younger sons who inherited nothing used violence and plunder to build their fortunes. Religious military orders like the Knights Templar took vows of poverty and chastity, but many broke those vows the moment an opportunity appeared. Let us return to daily life. After morning training and armor maintenance, you might receive your actual duties. Perhaps you escort a merchant through dangerous territory. Perhaps you supervise repairs to the castle wall. Perhaps you ride to a nearby village to collect taxes, which means threatening peasants until they hand over grain, chickens, and silver coins. This is not glorious. This is uncomfortable, morally questionable work. But it is your job. The main meal happens around noon. Everyone gathers in the great hall according to strict hierarchy. The lord and his family sit at the high table on a raised platform. You sit below them at a lower table. Servants stand or sit on the floor. The food itself would shock modern people. Almost everything tastes heavily of salt because salt is the only way to preserve meat. You eat pork, mutton, and chicken that has been sitting in salt barrels for months. Fresh vegetables appear sometimes, but fruits are rare and expensive. Bread serves as both food and plate. These thick slices of stale bread are called trenchers. You pile your meat and vegetables on top, and the bread soaks up all the juices and sauces. After the meal, the soggy bread is given to the poor or thrown to the dogs that wander freely around the hall during meals. Yes, dogs everywhere. They fight over scraps, urinate in the corners, and no one cares. This is normal. The ale you drink with every meal is weak enough that you can drink it all day without getting drunk, but it is still alcohol. Medieval people, including children, drink weak ale from breakfast onward because water from rivers and wells often makes people sick. Nobody knows about bacteria, but everyone knows that ale is safer than water. So everyone all the time is slightly buzzed. Perhaps this makes the smell of the great hall more tolerable. Afternoons involve more duties or possibly some recreation. Hunting is popular, but it serves a practical purpose beyond fun. Tracking animals, coordinating with other hunters, and making quick kills with lances or bows are all skills that translate directly to warfare. Chess is valued because it teaches strategy. Gambling with dice happens constantly, despite being technically forbidden by the church. Knights gamble on everything, losing money they do not have, getting into debt with merchants they officially look down upon. The irony is rich. Knights are the highest social class below nobility, but many of them are poorer than the merchants and craftsmen they consider beneath them. A successful cloth merchant might live in more comfort than a landless knight struggling with debt. Evening brings supper, another meal of bread, cheese, cold leftover meat, and more ale. Then people gather in the great hall for entertainment. Musicians play. Storytellers recite tales of legendary heroes. Knights discuss politics and trade gossip. The hall is lit by torches and candles, creating a smoky, dim atmosphere. Tapestries hang on the walls, providing a tiny bit of insulation against the constant cold. No matter the season, the castle is cold. Stone walls never warm up. In winter, you can see your breath indoors. People huddle near the fireplace, but the warmth barely extends 10 feet. Step away from the fire and you are immediately freezing again. As night falls, everyone returns to their sleeping spots in the great hall. You remove your outer clothes, but keep your linen undergarments on. The hall is never quiet. Men snore, cough, fart loudly without any embarrassment because medieval people had different ideas about bodily functions. Dogs wander around. Rats and mice scurry in the darkness. Occasionally you hear screams from prisoners in the dungeon below. This is your life. This is what being a knight actually means. Here is the final, most surprising truth. Despite everything, despite the cold, the smell, the lack of privacy, the constant discomfort, this life has meaning. You belong to something larger than yourself. You have brothers in arms who would die for you. You have a clear role in society. You know exactly what is expected of you. Modern people might have more comfort, but they often lack this sense of purpose and belonging. Medieval knights lived harder lives, but they knew why they lived. They had honor, even if that honor sometimes involved brutal violence. They had loyalty, even when that loyalty served cruel lords. They had community, even when that community smelled terrible and slept packed together in one big room. The castle walls are cold, the life is hard, but within those walls is a world that makes sense, where everyone knows their place and their purpose. In the year 2025, archaeologists break through a wall in a castle that has stood for 800 years. Behind it, they find a room sealed for 3 centuries. Inside, the air is stale and untouched. On the walls, black soot marks from artillery fire. On the floor, weapons left exactly where someone dropped them in 1676. Nobody knew this room existed. Now imagine how many other secrets remain hidden in the thousands of medieval castles scattered across Europe. The answer is more than you think, and some of them are genuinely bizarre. Let us start with something that happens regularly and still baffles researchers. Construction workers renovating old castles discover rooms that appear on no historical plans or documents. These are not small closets. These are entire chambers, sometimes with elaborate stonework, sometimes completely empty, sealed off from the rest of the building for centuries. Why? Who sealed them? When? The most fascinating part is that breaking through to these spaces often reveals absolutely nothing. Just an empty stone room with no obvious purpose. No treasure, no bodies, no explanation. Just silence and centuries-old air that nobody has breathed since medieval times. Here is what makes this truly strange. Medieval castle construction was expensive and difficult. Every stone had to be cut by hand, lifted into place by manual labor, and mortared carefully. Builders did not waste effort. Every room, every corridor, every feature served a clear purpose related to defense, daily life, or storing supplies. So when modern researchers find sealed rooms with no apparent function, it creates a genuine mystery. What was so important that someone spent enormous resources to build it, then sealed it away forever? Some theories suggest these rooms were emergency refugees during sieges. Others propose they held something valuable that was removed before sealing. But many sealed rooms contain literally nothing, not even marks on the walls to indicate what they once held. Now let us talk about symbols carved into castle stones. Across hundreds of castles in England, France, Germany, and beyond, you find strange marks etched into walls, columns, and doorways. These are not decorative. These are not random scratches. These are deliberate symbols that follow patterns researchers cannot fully decode. Some look like geometric shapes, circles within circles, overlapping triangles, grids with specific dimensions. Others resemble letters from alphabets that do not match any known medieval script. Some appear to be mathematical diagrams using principles that should not exist in medieval knowledge. The symbols appear in castles built centuries apart, separated by hundreds of miles, constructed by different lords who seemingly had no connection to each other. How did the same symbols spread across such distances in an era with no mass communication? The leading theory involves secret mason guilds. Medieval stoneworkers formed powerful organizations that controlled who could learn building techniques. These guilds jealously guarded their knowledge, teaching it only through direct apprenticeship. Perhaps the symbols were part of this hidden knowledge system, markers that allowed guild members to recognize each other's work or indicate structurally important points that only trained craftsmen would understand. But this theory has problems. Some symbols appear in places that serve no structural purpose. Some seem deliberately placed to be hidden, carved into stones that were immediately covered by other construction. Why carve a symbol that nobody will ever see? Another explanation involves protective magic. Medieval people believed deeply in supernatural forces. They carved symbols to ward off evil spirits, prevent disease, or bring good fortune to the building's inhabitants. Circles, crosses, and complex geometric patterns all had magical significance in medieval belief systems. The problem with this theory is that many castle symbols do not match known protective charms from medieval grimoires and religious texts. They are something else, something whose meaning has been completely lost. Here is something even stranger. Modern technology allows researchers to scan castle walls with ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging. These scans reveal hollow spaces behind seemingly solid stonework. Sometimes investigation shows these are just structural features, gaps left for stability or ventilation. But sometimes, breaking through reveals genuine hidden passages and chambers. In 2025, researchers in Eastern Europe discovered a sealed room in a castle that had been cut off since an explosion in 1676. The room contained weapons, soot-stained walls from artillery fire, and a small gap in one wall that might lead to tunnels that have existed only in local legends until now. The room had been perfectly preserved, a time capsule from the moment it was sealed. These discoveries raise fascinating questions. How many other sealed spaces exist in castles that have been standing and inhabited for centuries? How many passages and chambers lie hidden behind walls that thousands of tourists walk past every year? Modern scanning technology only works if someone thinks to scan a specific area. Most castles are so large and complex that systematic scanning of every wall would take years and cost enormous amounts of money. So most hidden spaces remain hidden, waiting for some future accident or renovation to reveal them. Now we must discuss the legend of the oubliette, because this story perfectly demonstrates how history and legend become confused. The word oubliette comes from French meaning to forget. According to legend, an oubliette is a dungeon cell accessed only through a trap door in the ceiling. Prisoners were lowered down into darkness, then forgotten completely, left to die of starvation with no possibility of escape. Many castles claim to have oubliettes. Tour guides tell dramatic stories about them. But here is the shocking truth. Archaeological evidence for genuine oubliettes is extremely limited. Most spaces identified as oubliettes turn out to be something else entirely. Some were wells, some were storage pits for grain, some were waste disposal shafts, some were simply basement rooms whose original access points have been lost over centuries of construction changes. However, a few genuine examples do exist. Spaces clearly designed to hold human beings in terrible conditions, accessible only from above, with no way out. Why create such an impractical prison? A normal cell is easier to build, easier to guard, and allows you to actually interrogate or monitor the prisoner. An oubliette serves no practical purpose. You cannot question someone trapped in darkness below your feet. You cannot retrieve them if you change your mind. The only function is pure psychological terror and the ability to make someone disappear without a trace. Some historians believe oubliettes were less about actual imprisonment and more about creating legends that would frighten enemies. The threat of the oubliette might have been more useful than the reality of it. This brings us to castle ghost stories. And here is where things get psychologically interesting. Almost every medieval castle with a long history has ghost legends. A murdered noblewoman who walks the halls. A knight who starved to death unjustly. Crying children. Mysterious cold spots. Modern people might dismiss these as superstition, but they reveal important truths about what living in these structures actually felt like. Castles generate strange phenomena that would terrify anyone without scientific explanations. Wind howling through narrow arrow slits creates sounds remarkably similar to human voices or crying. Temperature differences in stone corridors create genuine cold spots where the air drops 10 degrees in a single step. Rats and other animals living in the walls make scratching and thumping sounds that in darkness could easily be mistaken for footsteps. Stone buildings expand and contract with temperature changes, creating cracking and groaning sounds throughout the night. Shadows cast by a single candle seem to move independently, dancing across walls in ways that trick the eye. Medieval people expected to encounter supernatural forces. They believed the dead could return as ghosts, especially if they had died violently or unjustly. Given the amount of genuine violence that occurred in castles during their operational lifetimes, it is not surprising inhabitants believed these places were haunted. What makes the legends interesting is how they transform over time. A minor historical incident becomes elaborate. A servant who fell downstairs becomes a murder victim. An illness becomes a poisoning. The passage of time turns tragedy into legend, and legend becomes inseparable from the physical building itself. The castle is not just stone and mortar. It is stories layered upon stories, with truth and fiction so mixed together that separating them becomes impossible. Let us discuss hidden treasure, because this legend appears at almost every castle and occasionally turns out to be real. The typical story goes like this. As enemy forces approached, the castle's defenders hid their valuables in secret locations. They died during the siege or fled before revealing where the treasure was concealed. Centuries pass. The location is forgotten. The treasure remains hidden still. Most treasure legends are complete fiction, elaborated over generations until they bear no resemblance to actual history. But here is the fascinating part. Sometimes construction workers find caches of coins, jewelry, or weapons hidden in walls, under floors, or in forgotten chambers. These discoveries prove that people did hide valuables, and sometimes those hiding places remained undiscovered for centuries. The question is why? If you hide something valuable, you presumably intend to retrieve it later. If you die before retrieval, presumably your family or associates know the location. For a hiding place to remain secret for centuries requires either everyone who knew about it dying suddenly, or deliberate concealment where the hider intentionally told nobody. Both scenarios suggest dramatic, probably violent circumstances. Some hidden objects have nothing to do with treasure. Archaeologists occasionally discover human remains walled up in castle structures. Sometimes these are plague victims, hastily sealed into rooms during epidemics when proper burial was impossible. Sometimes they are execution victims, their bodies hidden to avoid political complications. Sometimes the identity and reason remain complete mysteries. Modern forensic analysis can determine age, gender, and approximate time of death, but cannot explain why someone's body was concealed within a castle wall instead of being buried normally. These discoveries remind us that castles were not just military structures or administrative centers. They were places where human drama played out in its full complexity, including aspects people preferred to hide. Religious military orders add another layer of mystery to castle history. The Knights Templar controlled numerous castles across Europe and the Middle East. When their order was suppressed in the early 14th century, legends quickly developed about hidden Templar treasures and religious relics concealed in their former properties. Modern researchers have investigated these claims extensively. Some minor discoveries have been made, mostly documents and small artifacts. The legendary vast Templar treasure remains unfound and probably never existed as described. What is clear is that Templars did use their castles for activities beyond simple military defense. They served as banking facilities, administrative centers, and repositories for religious items. The combination of military power, religious authority, and financial wealth made them both respected and feared. Their sudden fall left many questions about what they had accumulated and where it might have gone. Some of it was certainly seized by authorities. Some was probably distributed among former members. Some might indeed remain hidden in locations that have not yet been discovered. Architecture provides its own mysteries. Some castles have features whose purpose remains unclear even to modern researchers. Staircases that lead nowhere, ending at solid walls. Windows placed where they provide no view and serve no obvious function. Rooms too small for habitation, but too elaborate for simple storage. These anomalies puzzle experts because medieval builders did not waste resources. Every feature had a purpose. When we cannot determine that purpose, it suggests we are missing crucial information about how medieval people actually used these spaces. Perhaps some features had symbolic or ceremonial importance that was so obvious to medieval inhabitants that nobody bothered to document it. Perhaps they related to astronomical observations, religious rituals, or building techniques that have been completely forgotten. Without written records explaining these features, modern researchers can only speculate. As you walk through a castle now, remember this. You are walking through a puzzle that has not been fully solved. Behind these walls might be rooms nobody has entered for centuries. Beneath your feet might be passages known only through legend. The symbols carved into these stones might hold meanings that have been completely lost. Every castle keeps its secrets, revealing them slowly and reluctantly, one discovery at a time.
And the most exciting part?
The next discovery might happen tomorrow, or it might wait another 300 years. You stand before a castle well. The opening is small, perhaps 3 feet across. You drop a stone into the darkness and count.
1 second.
2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Finally, far below, you hear the splash. This well goes down over 200 feet through solid rock, cut by hand with medieval tools. It took 30 years to build. 30 years of workers descending into darkness every day, chipping away stone bit by bit, hoping the oxygen supply would not run out before they reached water. Castle engineering was not just impressive for medieval times. Some of it remains impressive even by modern standards, and some of the techniques used have been completely lost. Let us start with that well because it demonstrates engineering genius that most people never consider. Digging down 200 feet through solid rock is difficult enough with modern machinery. Medieval workers had only hammers and chisels, but the real challenge was oxygen. As you dig deeper, the air becomes stale and dangerous. Workers would pass out or die from lack of oxygen. Medieval engineers solved this problem with a technique so clever that it seems almost modern. They built a dividing wall inside the well shaft, usually made of wood, creating 2 separate channels. They sealed the gaps with straw and pitch to make it airtight. Then they built a fireplace over one opening at the top. The fire sucked air down through one channel, circulated it at the bottom where workers were digging, and pulled stale air up through the other channel. This created an artificial ventilation system using nothing but fire and clever design. Workers could breathe safely even at great depths. This technique required deep understanding of airflow and pressure that supposedly did not exist in medieval knowledge. Yet clearly it did exist because the wells got dug and workers survived to complete them. Why go to such enormous effort for a well? Because water meant survival. During a siege that could last months or even years, an external water source could be poisoned or cut off. Enemies would throw dead animals into outside wells, contaminating the water and forcing the garrison to surrender. A well inside the castle walls could not be poisoned from outside. It was literally worth more than gold because without it, the castle could not hold out against a siege, no matter how much food or how many weapons it had. Some castle wells cost more to build than the entire rest of the castle combined. The well was not just part of the fortress. It was the heart that kept the fortress alive. Now, let us discuss castle walls because they were far more sophisticated than they appear. Medieval engineers understood principles of defense that modern people often miss.
Notice the thickness.
Many castle walls are 10 to 15 feet thick. This is not just about stopping arrows or swords. These walls were designed to withstand battering rams and later, early cannon fire. But thickness alone is not enough. The real genius is in the construction technique. Castle walls are not solid stone all the way through. They are actually two separate walls with rubble fill between them. The outer wall consists of carefully cut and fitted stones. The inner wall is similar. The space between them is packed with rocks, broken stone, and mortar. This creates a composite structure that absorbs and distributes impact force much better than a solid wall would. When a battering ram hits the outer wall, the force spreads through the rubble fill instead of transferring directly to the inner wall. This makes the wall incredibly resistant to impacts that would crack a solid stone structure. Here is something even more clever. Many castle walls slope slightly outward at the base. This is called a batter or a plinth. The slope serves multiple purposes. First, it makes the wall more stable by widening the base and lowering the center of gravity. Second, it causes objects dropped from above to bounce outward toward attackers rather than falling straight down. Imagine defenders dropping stones from the battlements. With a vertical wall, some stones might bounce back against the wall and fall harmlessly. With a sloped base, stones bounce outward, hitting enemies who are trying to shelter close to the wall. Third, the slope makes it much harder to position scaling ladders. The ladder base must be placed further from the wall, creating a steeper, more dangerous climb. Medieval engineers thought through every detail of defensive geometry. Let us talk about arrow slits, those narrow vertical openings in castle walls. From the outside, they look like simple cracks in the stone, barely wide enough to shoot an arrow through. But step inside and examine them from the defender's perspective, and you see the real cleverness. The opening narrows dramatically toward the outside, creating a shape like a funnel. From inside, the archer has a wide space to move, aim, and shoot. From outside, attacking archers see only a tiny target that is nearly impossible to hit with return fire. The stone walls around the slit protect the defender almost completely, while still allowing them to shoot outward. Some arrow slits have additional features. Crossbow slits include horizontal bars creating a cross shape, allowing the crossbowman to shoot at different angles without exposing himself. Later, arrow slits include circular openings at the bottom, designed for early firearms. Medieval engineers constantly adapted their designs to new weapons technology. Castle gates were perhaps the most vulnerable point, and engineers compensated by creating layered defenses that would terrify any attacker. The entrance typically featured multiple gates, each with its own defenses. First came the barbican, an outer gatehouse that forced attackers through a narrow passage under fire from above. Defenders on the battlements could shoot arrows, drop stones, and pour burning oil on anyone trapped below. The gate itself was thick timber, reinforced with iron bands, capable of absorbing tremendous punishment. Behind it, a massive wooden beam called a drawbar slid across the entire width of the gate, locking it in place. This beam sat in deep sockets carved into the stone walls. Even if attackers broke through the gate, the drawbar would hold until they could chop through that as well. But the real nightmare was the portcullis, a heavy iron or iron-reinforced wooden grate that dropped vertically down grooves carved into the gate passage. The portcullis was suspended by chains running through pulleys to a windlass, a mechanical device that allowed a few men to raise and lower something weighing several tons. When lowered, the portcullis had iron spikes at the bottom designed to impale anyone caught beneath it. Even if attackers managed to break through the main gate, they would face this barrier which could not be rammed effectively and was extremely difficult to cut through or lift. Some castles had multiple portcullises in sequence, creating a series of traps. If the first one dropped, attackers would be caught in a killing zone between two grates, unable to advance or retreat, while defenders shot at them from above through murder holes, openings in the ceiling of the gate passage. The towers deserve special attention because their design evolved over centuries as warfare changed. Early medieval castles often had square towers, which were simpler to build, but engineers discovered that square towers had a fatal weakness. Attacking forces could focus their efforts on the corners, and the right-angled joints were structural weak points. Stone under stress cracks more easily at corners. Battering rams could bring down a square tower by systematically attacking one corner until the whole structure became unstable. By the 13th century, castle builders had largely switched to round towers, which had no corners to attack. The curved shape distributed force evenly around the entire structure. Round towers were also harder to mine under, a common siege tactic where attackers would dig tunnels beneath the walls and collapse them. The circular foundation was more stable and less likely to collapse from undermining. Water management in castles demonstrates engineering sophistication that people rarely appreciate. A castle housing 100 or more people needed not just drinking water but also water for cooking, cleaning and sanitation. Some castles used cisterns, large underground tanks that collected rainwater from the roofs. The water would drain through channels cut into the stonework, filter through layers of sand and gravel, and collect in the cistern below. This provided relatively clean water even during sieges. Other castles had aqueducts bringing water from distant springs, sometimes running for miles through pipes made of lead or hollowed wood. These systems required precise understanding of gravity flow, water pressure, and pipe engineering. Medieval engineers calculated gradients accurately enough to bring water uphill in some sections using siphon principles, where water would flow up one side of a valley if it could flow down from a higher point on the other side. Sanitation was another engineering challenge. We already discussed the garderobe, that toilet opening in the wall, but the waste disposal system was more complex than it first appears. Some castles had vertical shafts running through multiple floors, allowing each level to have its own garderobe that connected to the same disposal system. At the bottom, waste either dropped into the moat, which served the additional purpose of making it even more disgusting for attackers to cross, or into cesspits that would be cleaned out periodically by people with truly unpleasant jobs. Some castles had more sophisticated drainage systems with channels carrying waste away from the main structure to pits outside the walls. These channels were angled carefully to use gravity effectively, preventing blockages while ensuring waste moved away from drinking water sources. Medieval engineers understood sanitation well enough to prevent the worst waterborne diseases, though they did not understand the germ theory that explained why their systems worked. Ventilation deserves mention because castle life would have been even more unpleasant without it. The towers and high walls were not just defensive features. They acted as wind catchers and air circulators. Carefully placed windows and openings created airflow patterns that moved fresh air through the building and carried smoke from fireplaces out through specifically designed vents. Some castles had flues built into the thick walls, allowing smoke to rise and exhaust without filling the rooms. This required understanding air pressure and thermal dynamics. Hot air rises so smoke would naturally draw upward through the flues, But the system only worked if the flue design prevented downdrafts and maintained proper airflow. Medieval engineers solved these problems through trial and error and accumulated knowledge passed down through mason guilds. Some engineering techniques have been completely lost. Modern researchers examining certain castle features cannot figure out how they were built with medieval tools. Some blocks of stone are so precisely cut and fitted that mortar was unnecessary. The joints are so tight that you cannot fit a knife blade between the stones. How did medieval masons achieve this precision without power tools or modern measuring equipment? They used techniques involving wooden templates, careful marking, and incredibly patient chiseling, but the exact methods were trade secrets that died with the master craftsmen who knew them. Modern stonemasons trying to recreate medieval techniques struggle to match the precision that medieval workers achieved routinely. This suggests a level of skill and knowledge that was more sophisticated than often assumed. As you walk through a castle now, look at it differently.
These walls are not just stacked stones.
They are carefully engineered structures using principles that took centuries to develop. Every feature serves multiple purposes. Every design choice was tested through practical experience, often at the cost of lives lost when designs failed. The castle is a massive machine built from stone, designed to keep people alive under the worst possible circumstances. The engineering genius behind it deserves respect, even admiration. Medieval people built these structures to last centuries, and many have stood for nearly 1,000 years, still impressive, still functional, still teaching us that sophisticated engineering does not require modern technology. It requires intelligence, determination, and deep understanding of materials and forces. Medieval engineers had all three in abundance. You enter the private chambers where the lord and lady of the castle live. Unlike the cold stone halls and crowded great hall, these rooms breathe warmth and luxury. Rich tapestries hang on the walls, intricate wooden furniture fills the space, and the scent of herbs and perfumes allows you to forget, if only for a moment, the hardships of castle life. Here, behind heavy doors and guarded by loyal servants, power exerts its quiet, invisible influence. Imagine the daily routine of the lord. He wakes gradually, helped by chamberlains who loosen his heavy clothing and assist in dressing. His robes are made from fine fabrics imported from faraway lands. Soft silks, thick velvets, and brocades embroidered with gold thread. He wears rings encrusted with jewels that sparkle in the dim light. His diet is rich with spices like cinnamon and saffron, adding exotic flavors to meals. But the lord is no idle aristocrat. His days are packed with meetings, hearing disputes, managing estates, negotiating with visiting merchants, and planning defenses. His decisions can send men to war or determine the fate of villages. The lady of the castle holds an equally demanding agenda. She oversees the household staff who number in the hundreds: cooks, maids, blacksmiths, and gardeners. She ensures the smooth running of the estate, managing supplies, organizing grand feasts, arranging marriages for her children, and maintaining valuable social connections. Noble women were often educated in reading and writing, unusual for medieval times, and many were patrons of the arts, commissioning illuminated manuscripts, tapestries, and music performances. The lady is the political heart of the castle, wielding influence that often surpasses her husband's in subtle but decisive ways. Life at court within the castle walls is filled with entertainment, but it is never simple pleasure. Feasts are magnificent affairs filled with richly prepared food, flavored with expensive spices. Roasted meats lay beside pies filled with exotic fruits, and tables are adorned with silver and goldware. Jugglers, musicians, and dancers perform to amuse the guests. But beneath the surface, the court is a battlefield of its own. A place where alliances are forged and broken, secrets exchanged, and ambitions nurtured. You overhear whispered conversations about an upcoming marriage that could unite two powerful families. Another noble laments losing land to a rival, while a visiting diplomat promises support in exchange for political favors. Magic and superstition play roles too. Personal astrologers advise the Lord on auspicious days to sign treaties or wage war. Accusations of witchcraft or curses are taken seriously, used as weapons in the ongoing struggle for influence. A noble's clothing is more than fashion. It is a statement of power. Colors like deep purple and rich crimson cost fortunes to produce and were strictly regulated by sumptuary laws, a way to show rank and status. The finer the fabric, the higher the wearer in the social hierarchy. Embroidery, depicting the family crest or religious symbols, not only decorates but asserts lineage and divine favor. Gardens outside the chambers serve as tranquil retreats and symbols of control over nature. Exotic plants imported from the East grow alongside native flowers. Fountains play gently, their sounds masking whispered conspiracies. In these gardens, ladies practice embroidery, host private meetings, or stroll under arches covered with climbing roses. Despite the splendor, dangers lurk close. Poisoning was a real fear. The kitchens were guarded as fiercely as the walls, and suspicious deaths were sometimes attributed to careful plots. Trusted servants could be spies, guests might mask enemies. Relationships were fragile and could turn deadly. Power demanded constant vigilance. Yet amidst intrigue and danger, moments of true beauty and joy existed. Music inspired, poetry celebrated, and dance lifted spirits after long days. The great halls echoed with laughter and song, reminders that even in the harsh world of medieval castles, humanity endured in all its complexity. This world of luxury and power exists side by side with the soldier's harsh reality. The lord and lady live protected, warm, and opulent, while just beyond their chambers the sounds of training, toil, and struggle never cease. This contrast illustrates the delicate balance of medieval castle life between authority and labor, splendor and hardship, ambition and survival. While the lords and knights live surrounded by splendor or the harsh reality of battle training, a vast shadowy workforce keeps the castle alive. You step out of the great hall into the labyrinth of corridors and hidden rooms where cooks, blacksmiths, stable hands, and washerwomen toil. Their lives are the backbone of the castle. Without them, the stone walls and noble feasts mean nothing. Imagine the kitchen filled with clatter and smoke. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, herbs, and burned wood. Hundreds of meals must be prepared each day, often for 100 or more people. The cooks rise long before dawn, fetching water, starting fires, and chopping wood. There is no dishwasher or refrigerator. All food is cooked over open flames in huge cauldrons or on spits slowly turning over the fire. Water is carried by buckets from the well or cistern, a back-breaking task. Every drop must be used wisely because fetching water is time-consuming and necessary for everything: cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Meat is salted and dried for preservation.
Fresh vegetables come only seasonally.
Blacksmiths work beside the kitchen, hammering metal to repair weapons, shoe horses, and create tools. The shop is hot, noisy, and dangerous. Sparks fly as they hammer glowing iron on anvils. Laundry is a constant burden. Washerwomen wash linen underwear, tablecloths and bedsheets by hand in cold water, and then dry the linens on racks near the chimney to use the warmth. Clothes are changed frequently only because linen absorbs so much sweat and dirt. Woolen outer garments are hardly ever washed and only brushed. You hear shouts coming from the stables where stable hands rush to care for hundreds of horses. Feeding, grooming, cleaning stalls and preparing horses for battle or travel requires constant attention. Horses are valuable assets and treated with great care. Stable hands endure harsh conditions, muck and cold, long hours with little rest. In addition to physical labor, many servants have specialized roles. The gatekeeper controls who enters and leaves, checking every visitor against the Lord's orders. The chamberlain manages the Lord's private chambers, arranging furniture, lighting candles, and overseeing maintenance. The steward or bailiff oversees finances and estate management, but answers to the Lord. Everyone has a precise role with strict rules and expectations. Social hierarchy extends to servants too. Some are trusted and well paid, like the pious chaplain or skilled blacksmith. Others, like scullery maids and latrine cleaners, bear the lowest status and most unpleasant jobs. Yet all are essential to the functioning of the castle. Life among servants is harsh. Meals are meagre compared to those of the nobility. Work hours are long, often from dawn till after dark. Living quarters for lower servants are cramped and lacking privacy, similar to the knight's great hall. Disease spreads rapidly through crowded living conditions. Medieval medicine is rudimentary and often powerless to prevent epidemics. Despite the hardships, servants form close-knit communities. They share stories, jokes, and support one another. Apprenticeships provide skills and opportunity for advancement, but this is rare. Most servants live their entire lives in service, their existence largely invisible to the wealthy who benefit most from their labor. Your journey through the castle now takes you into the forgotten corners, where the unsung work of commoners makes possible the glory and survival of the fortress. Remember, behind every feast, every battle, and every royal decree is the tireless effort of hundreds of hands working in shadows, whose stories are seldom told but no less vital. You hear a horn blast in the distance. It is not a call to hunt. It is a warning. Lookouts on the highest tower have spotted an army approaching. The castle, which moments ago was a bustling center of daily life, transforms into a machine of war. The gate slams shut. The drawbridge groans as it is pulled up, severing the connection to the outside world. The life you knew has stopped. Now only survival matters. Welcome to a medieval siege, a brutal contest of engineering, endurance, and psychological terror that could last for months or even years. The first thing an attacking army does is encircle the castle. This is called circumvallation. They build their own temporary fortifications, a ring of ditches and wooden palisades, to protect themselves from any surprise attacks from your garrison. A second line of defense, the contravallation, is built facing outward to protect the besiegers from any relief army that might arrive to help you. The enemy has effectively built a fortress to attack your fortress. You are now trapped, cut off from all supplies and all hope of escape. The psychological pressure begins immediately. You watch from the battlements as the enemy army sets up camp, builds their siege engines, and prepares to dismantle your world, stone by stone. Here is what makes a siege so terrifying. It is not a quick battle. It is a slow, grinding process of destruction. The enemy's goal is to break your will before they break your walls. They begin with psychological warfare. At night, they might execute prisoners in full view of the castle walls, their screams echoing across the fields. They might use catapults to launch not stones but diseased animal carcasses or the heads of captured soldiers over your walls, hoping to spread disease and terror. They will shout taunts and insults, reminding you that your food will run out, your water will become foul, and your lord has abandoned you.
The noise is constant.
The rhythmic thud of battering rams, the crash of stones from trebuchets, the shouts of soldiers, the screams of the wounded. There is no silence, no peace, no moment to forget that an army of men is dedicated to your complete destruction. Let us examine the weapons of a siege, because they are marvels of medieval engineering. The king of siege engines is the trebuchet, a massive catapult that uses a counterweight to launch projectiles. A large trebuchet can hurl stones weighing over 300 pounds for hundreds of yards with terrifying accuracy. The constant bombardment is designed to weaken a specific section of your wall until it collapses. The sound of a trebuchet stone hitting the wall is like an earthquake. The entire castle shudders. Dust and stone fragments rain down. Defenders must constantly risk their lives to make repairs, filling breaches with timber and stone, knowing that the next projectile could hit them at any moment. While trebuchets attack the walls, other engines target the defenders. Mangonels, which use twisted rope for tension, can fire smaller stones, pots of burning pitch, or even beehives in high arcs over the walls, creating chaos and injury inside the castle. Ballistas, giant crossbows, fire enormous bolts that can pierce through wooden shields and kill multiple men with a single shot. The air is thick with projectiles.
Arrows rain down from longbowmen, their shafts forming a dark cloud before they strike.
Your own archers must return fire from the relative safety of arrow slits, but the sheer volume of enemy fire makes any exposure on the battlements a deadly risk. The most direct form of attack is the battering ram. This is a massive log, sometimes capped with iron, suspended from a wooden frame and covered by a protective roof. Dozens of men swing the ram back and forth, building momentum until it strikes the castle gate with incredible force. The gate is thick timber reinforced with iron, but no gate can withstand a battering ram forever. Your job as a defender is to stop the ram before it can do its work. You drop huge stones on the roof, hoping to smash it. You pour boiling water, hot sand, or even more expensive boiling oil through murder holes, openings in the ceiling of the gate passage. Hot sand is particularly nasty because it gets inside armor and causes terrible burns. You use long poles with hooks to try to grapple the ram and lift it or turn it over. The fighting around the gatehouse is a desperate, close-quarters struggle. If the walls are too strong for rams and trebuchets, the attackers go underground. They employ miners, specialists who dig tunnels called saps beneath the castle walls. The tunnel is shored up with timber props. Once the tunnel extends under the wall's foundation, the miners fill the cavity with combustible materials like pig fat, brushwood, and sulfur.
They set it on fire and then run.
The fire burns through the wooden props, and the weight of the wall above causes the foundation to collapse, creating a breach. Mining is a slow, dangerous, and stealthy form of attack. As a defender, your only hope is to detect the digging. You place bowls of water on the ground. The vibrations from underground digging will create ripples on the water's surface, telling you where the miners are. Your own miners then dig counter tunnels to intercept the enemy's sap. This leads to terrifying underground battles, fought in pitch darkness with picks, shovels, and short swords. Sometimes defenders use bellows to pump smoke into enemy tunnels, suffocating the miners before they can finish their work. Another terrifying sight is the siege tower. This is a massive wooden tower on wheels built on site, often taller than the castle walls themselves. It is covered with water-soaked animal hides to protect it from fire arrows. Dozens of men push the tower slowly toward the wall. First, the moat must be filled in with earth and timber to create a path.
As the tower approaches, archers inside it fire down onto your battlements, clearing defenders away.
At the top of the tower is a drawbridge. Once the tower reaches the wall, the drawbridge drops, and enemy soldiers pour across directly onto your ramparts. Defending against a siege tower is a nightmare. You throw everything you have at it: stones, fire, giant crossbow bolts. You try to build your own wooden extensions on the wall to make it taller than the tower. If the tower reaches the wall, the fight becomes a desperate hand-to-hand struggle for control of the battlements. As a defender, you have your own array of weapons and tactics. The castle's architecture is your primary weapon. The machicolations, those openings in the floor of overhanging battlements, allow you to drop things directly on enemies at the base of the wall without exposing yourself. The staircases inside towers are often spiral and turn clockwise. This forces a right-handed attacker to expose their body to attack from a defender above, who has more room to swing their sword. The steps themselves are often deliberately uneven in height, designed to make attackers stumble as they ascend. These are called stumble steps or trip steps, and they are a simple but effective way to disrupt an assault. Life during a siege is a slow descent into misery. Food is strictly rationed. At first you eat bread and salted meat. As the siege drags on, you eat whatever is available: horses, dogs, cats, rats. You drink ale until it runs out, then you rely on water from the castle well. If the well runs dry, you are finished. Disease spreads rapidly in the crowded, unsanitary conditions. A small wound can become infected and kill you. Morale is a constant battle. The lord and the castle's priests try to keep spirits high with religious services, promises of victory, and displays of defiance. But as the weeks turn into months, hope begins to fade. You watch your friends die, not just from enemy weapons, but from hunger and disease. Sometimes the only option is a sally, a surprise attack, where a group of defenders rushes out of a small, hidden gate, a sally port, to attack the enemy camp. The goal is not to win a major battle, but to cause chaos, burn siege engines, and then retreat back into the castle before the enemy can organize a response. A successful sally can be a huge morale boost, but it is incredibly risky. Many who leave do not return. The end of a siege comes in one of three ways. First, a relief army might arrive and break the siege by attacking the besiegers from behind. This is what every defender prays for. Second, the attackers might give up. Sieges are incredibly expensive. The attacking army also suffers from disease and supply problems. If the castle holds out long enough, the cost of the siege might become too high, and the enemy might simply pack up and leave. Third, and most common, the castle falls. This happens either through a successful assault, where attackers breach the walls and overwhelm the defenders, or through surrender. The decision to surrender is agonizing. If you surrender, your life might be spared, but the castle will be lost. If you fight to the last man and the castle is taken by storm, the laws of war state that the attackers are allowed to loot, kill, and destroy everything and everyone inside. No mercy is expected. The final moments of a failed siege are chaos. Attackers pour through a breach in the wall or over the battlements. The fighting moves from the walls into the courtyards, the halls, the stairways. It is no longer an organized battle, but a series of desperate individual struggles for survival. As you stand on the wall watching the enemy army swarm below, you know that your fate and the fate of everyone inside these stone walls will be decided in the coming hours. Your training, your courage, your faith, everything is now put to the final test. The most dangerous battles in a castle are not fought with swords, but with whispers. As you walk the torchlit corridors at night, you feel the weight of unspoken secrets. The air is thick with ambition, jealousy, and fear. This is the world of courtly intrigue, a silent, deadly game where a misplaced word can be as fatal as a dagger in the dark, and the person smiling at you across the feast table might be plotting your downfall. The true currency of power within these walls is not gold, but information. Imagine the lord of the castle, seemingly absolute in his power, yet he is surrounded by threats that are not visible. His own family members may covet his position. His wife, politically astute, might be arranging a marriage for their daughter that benefits her own family's agenda, not his. His younger brother, who inherited no land and lives on the lord's charity, may secretly resent him. He watches his lord's every move, looking for weakness, for an opportunity. The court is a web of loyalties, but these loyalties are constantly shifting. A knight who feels he has been overlooked for promotion might be persuaded to open a gate for a rival lord in exchange for land and title. A servant, poorly paid and badly treated, could be bribed to add a colorless powder to the lord's wine. Poison is the silent weapon of the medieval court. It is a constant, terrifying fear. Lords and powerful nobles often employed food tasters, unfortunate servants whose job was to eat a small portion of every dish before it was served to their master. If the taster became ill or died, the food was discarded. But this was not foolproof. Some poisons were slow-acting, taking days or weeks to kill, making it impossible to trace the source. Suspicious deaths were common. Did the old baron die of a sudden illness? Or was his ambitious nephew simply tired of waiting for his inheritance? The truth was often buried with the victim. This fear led to bizarre precautions. Some nobles owned serpents' tongues, which were actually fossilized shark teeth, believing they would sweat or change color in the presence of poison.
Others used unicorn horns, usually narwhal tusks, for the same purpose.
These magical objects provided a sense of security, however false, in a world where your next meal could be your last. Marriage is not a matter of love. It is a political transaction, a merger of corporations. The lord's daughter, perhaps only 12 or 13 years old, is a valuable asset. Her marriage can secure a border, end a long-running feud, or create a powerful alliance. She has no say in the matter. She might be sent hundreds of miles away to marry a man she has never met, a man twice her age. Her happiness is irrelevant. Her duty is to her family and to the stability of the realm. These arranged marriages create a network of spies and informants. The young bride, now living in a rival castle, might be expected to send secret messages back to her father, reporting on her new husband's military strength, his alliances, his weaknesses. She is caught between her loyalty to her birth family and her new obligations. A single misstep could lead to her being accused of treason and imprisoned, or worse. The court is filled with people whose roles are ambiguous. The court jester, who seems to be a simple fool, is often one of the most powerful people in the castle. He is the only one who can speak truth to the lord without fear of punishment. His jokes and songs often contain sharp political commentary or veiled warnings. He is an observer, moving freely between the nobles and the servants, gathering information that no one else can. The castle's priest, or chaplain, is another key figure. As the Lord's confessor, he knows the deepest secrets of everyone in the castle. His spiritual guidance can be used to manipulate political decisions. He might advise the Lord that a war against a certain rival is God's will, or that a treaty with another is a path to damnation. His influence is subtle but immense. Gossip is a weapon. A whispered rumor can destroy a reputation, break an alliance, or incite a feud. A courtier might start a rumor that a rival knight is a coward, hoping to undermine his position. An accusation of heresy or witchcraft, even without proof, can be enough to ruin someone. In the claustrophobic environment of the castle, where everyone knows everyone else's business, rumors spread like wildfire. A noble lady's reputation for piety and virtue is her most valuable asset. A rumor of infidelity, even if completely false, can lead to her being divorced, disinherited, and cast out in disgrace. The fear of social ruin is a powerful tool for controlling behavior and settling scores. Betrayal can come from anywhere. A trusted captain of the guard could be in the pay of an enemy, ready to lead a coup at the right moment. A group of knights might conspire to overthrow their lord and replace him with someone more pliable, someone who will grant them more land and power. These conspiracies are hatched in secret, in clandestine meetings in forgotten parts of the castle. They use coded messages, secret handshakes, and passwords. The plotters live in constant fear of discovery. If their plot is uncovered, the punishment is swift and brutal. Execution for treason is a public spectacle designed to terrify anyone else who might be thinking of rebellion. Think about the physical layout of the castle. The very architecture facilitates intrigue. Tapestries hide listeners. Dark corners conceal observers. The maze of corridors allows for secret meetings and quick escapes. A servant can carry a message from one end of the castle to another without being seen by the wrong people. The constant noise of the castle, the clatter of the kitchens, the hammering of the blacksmith, the barking of dogs provides cover for hushed conversations. The castle is a stage, and everyone is an actor, playing a role, wearing a mask. The friendly smile, the courteous bow, the earnest promise, all might be part of a calculated performance. Here is a paradox of courtly life. While the castle is a place of immense danger and paranoia, it is also a center of culture and art. The same nobles who plot against each other also commission beautiful works of art, listen to poetry, and debate philosophy. The concept of courtly love, where a knight devotes himself to an unattainable noble lady, develops in this environment. It is a way of channeling the intense emotions of the court into a formalized romantic ritual. The knight writes poems for his lady, wears her colors in tournaments, and performs great deeds in her name. This is not necessarily about genuine love. It is about reputation, status, and demonstrating one's refinement and chivalry. But this idealized romance often masks the brutal reality of political marriages and the constant threat of betrayal. The life of an ambitious courtier is one of constant calculation. Who is in favor with the Lord today? Who is out? Which faction is rising and which is falling? You must attach yourself to a powerful patron, but choose wisely. If your patron falls from grace, you fall with them. You must flatter the powerful, befriend the influential, and be wary of everyone. You must learn to read the subtle signals of the court, the meaning of a glance, the tone of a voice, the significance of who sits where at the feast table. It is an exhausting, nerve-wracking existence, but the potential rewards are enormous: wealth, land, power, and a place in history. The castle is a treacherous game of chess, and every person in it is a piece, moving and being moved in a contest for ultimate control. The castle you see is a lie. The grand halls, the thick walls, the soaring towers, that is the public face of the fortress, the version shown to visitors, vassals, and enemies. But beneath that visible structure lies another castle, a secret one. It is a hidden network of passages, concealed chambers, and forgotten spaces that forms the castle's true nervous system. This is a world known only to a select few, the Lord, his heir, and perhaps the master mason who built it and took the secret to his grave. This hidden geography is the ultimate key to the castle's power, its survival, and its darkest secrets. Let us begin with the most vital of these secrets, the escape tunnel. For a lord facing a losing siege or a political coup, this passage is his final, most precious asset. Imagine a large tapestry hanging in the lord's private bedchamber, depicting a grand hunting scene. Behind this tapestry, a section of the stone wall is not what it seems. A specific stone, when pressed in just the right way, releases a hidden latch. The section of wall swings inward, revealing not a dark hole, but a small, well-furnished antechamber.
This room is a decoy.
A casual intruder might think this is the only secret, but within this room, a heavy wooden wardrobe stands against one wall. Pushing the wardrobe aside reveals another false wall, this one with a concealed door. Only behind this second layer of deception does the true passage begin. The passage is narrow, dark, and claustrophobic. The air is stale, smelling of damp earth and stone. It descends steeply, a spiral staircase cut into the very foundation of the castle. It goes down, down, far below the dungeons, far below the level of the moat. The tunnel then levels out, running for hundreds of yards under the castle grounds and the surrounding fields. The engineering is remarkable. The tunnel is lined with stone to prevent collapse and angled slightly to allow for drainage. Small ventilation shafts, disguised on the surface as rabbit holes or gaps between rocks, provide just enough air to breathe. The passage finally ends not in a dramatic cave opening, but in something mundane and easily overlooked. The cellar of a small, abandoned chapel in a nearby forest, or perhaps behind a false wall in a well located a mile away. For the Lord and his family, this is the path to a new life, a way to vanish into the night while their enemies are still celebrating their victory over an empty fortress. Not all passages are for escape. Some are for espionage. The walls of a castle have ears, and sometimes those ears are literal. Above the great hall, hidden between the decorative ceiling beams and the roof structure, runs a narrow walkway known as a listening gallery. From here, a spy can lie flat and listen to every conversation happening at the high table below. Small holes drilled through the wooden ceiling and disguised as knots in the wood or part of a decorative pattern provide a clear view. The Lord can learn of plots, gauge the loyalty of his vassals, and gather intelligence on visiting dignitaries, all while appearing to be absent. Other passages are built for more intimate spying. A narrow corridor might run behind the stone wall of a guest chamber. A small section of the wall, perhaps hidden behind a mirror or a wall hanging, contains a sliding stone or a peephole. From this vantage point, a servant or a knight loyal to the Lord can observe a guest's private meetings, see who they talk to, and what documents they read. This is the source of the castle's most valuable information, the raw data of intrigue and betrayal. In a world where loyalty is a commodity, knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and these secret passages are the primary means of acquiring it. Then there are the passages designed for warfare within the castle itself. A staircase might appear to lead only to a storeroom, but a false back wall in that room could open onto a passage that allows soldiers to move from one tower to another without being seen on the open battlements. During a siege, if attackers take control of one section of the wall, defenders can use these passages to launch a surprise counterattack from behind, appearing as if from nowhere. Some spiral staircases have a secret central column that is actually a narrow vertical shaft, a scaus, allowing a single person to ascend or descend quickly between floors using handholds carved into the stone. These hidden routes turn the castle into a three-dimensional chessboard, giving the defenders a crucial advantage over an enemy who sees only the obvious paths. Now, let us descend into the most feared part of the castle's secret world, the dungeon. Popular imagination pictures dungeons as vast subterranean complexes filled with elaborate torture devices, chained skeletons, and maniacal jailers. The reality is both more mundane and in some ways more horrible. The word dungeon comes from the French donjon, which simply means the main tower or keep of the castle. The lowest level of the keep, a place often used for storage, naturally became the place to hold prisoners. There were different levels of imprisonment. A high-ranking noble captured in battle would not be thrown into a filthy pit. He was a valuable asset, to be ransomed for a huge sum of money. He would be held under house arrest, in a secure but relatively comfortable room high in a tower. He would be fed well, allowed visitors under supervision, and treated with the respect due to his rank. His prison was gilded, but it was a prison nonetheless, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. For common prisoners, enemy soldiers, criminals, or those who had fallen out of favor with the Lord, the experience was very different. They were often thrown into a cellar, a communal holding area with a dirt floor, no light, and no sanitation. They were given minimal food and water, just enough to keep them alive. They slept on damp straw amidst their own filth. Disease was rampant. The true horror of the medieval dungeon was not active torture, which was less common than legends suggest, but passive neglect. You were not stretched on the rack. You were left to rot, to die slowly from disease, starvation, or despair. And then there was the most extreme form of imprisonment, a place where myth and reality meet, the oubliette. As we have seen, the term means the forgotten place, and that is its literal function. An oubliette is not a cell you walk into. It is a hole you are dropped into.
It is a narrow, bottle-shaped shaft, wider at the bottom than at the top, making it impossible to climb.
The only entrance is a trapdoor in the ceiling. A prisoner was lowered down, the trapdoor was locked, and they were utterly and completely alone in pitch black silence. There was no escape. There was no hope. Food and water were rarely, if ever, provided. You were not imprisoned.
You were erased.
The psychological terror of such a fate is difficult to comprehend. It was a punishment reserved for the most hated enemies, those whose very existence the Lord wished to expunge from history. Finally, we come to the secret rooms that were not for escape or imprisonment, but for hiding things of immense value. Not just gold and jewels, but people and ideas. In later medieval times, during periods of religious persecution, castles might contain priest holes. These were tiny, cleverly concealed chambers, sometimes no bigger than a coffin, where a priest could hide during a search. They were often built next to a chimney flue to provide a tiny bit of warmth and ventilation, or with a disguised pipe leading to the outside for air. A priest might have to stay in such a space for days, unable to move, in complete silence, praying he would not be discovered. Other secret rooms were treasuries. The Lord's wealth was not kept in a simple chest. It was secured in a hidden vault. Behind the fireplace in the Lord's study, one of the firestones might be a hidden lever. Pulling it would cause a section of the floor to descend, revealing a stone staircase leading to a small, subterranean chamber. The door to this chamber would be iron, with multiple complex locks. Inside, the Lord would keep his gold coin, his silver plate, his wife's jewelry, and, most importantly, his documents, land charters, treaties, and letters of alliance. In an age where ownership was proven by a piece of parchment with a wax seal, these documents were more valuable than any amount of gold. Not all secret rooms were created with such deliberate purpose. Over the centuries, as castles were expanded, remodeled, and repaired, entire sections could become accidentally sealed off. A new wall built to support a sagging ceiling might block an old doorway. A collapsed staircase might never be rebuilt, leaving the rooms it once led to inaccessible. These forgotten spaces become unintentional time capsules. In the 21st century, modern restoration projects using technology like ground-penetrating radar have uncovered such rooms. Imagine being the first person to enter a chamber that has been sealed since the 15th century. The air is perfectly still. A thick layer of dust covers everything. On a table sits a pewter mug and a book, left there by someone who expected to return in a few minutes, but, for some reason, never did. On the wall hangs a tapestry, its colours still vibrant after 500 years of darkness. These discoveries are rare and precious, providing an unblemished glimpse into a lost world. The secret architecture of the castle is a map of the medieval mind. The escape tunnels reveal a deep-seated pragmatism, a recognition that power is fleeting and a backup plan is essential. The spy passages show a world steeped in paranoia, where information is a weapon and trust is a weakness. The dungeons and oubliettes expose a brutal acceptance of cruelty as a tool of power, and the hidden vaults and priest holes demonstrate what was truly valued: wealth, political authority, and faith. To know the castle's secrets was to hold the keys to the kingdom. As you stand in the quiet darkness of a newly discovered passage, you are standing in the hidden corridors of history itself, a place of fear, ingenuity, and the timeless human instinct for survival. In the heart of the castle, amidst the clang of steel, the whispers of intrigue, and the daily grind of survival, stands a place of profound quiet, the chapel. It may be small, sometimes little more than a fortified room, but it is the spiritual core of the entire fortress. To understand the medieval castle, you must understand that it was not just a military and political center. It was a deeply religious space, where faith was not a private matter, but a powerful, all-encompassing force that shaped every aspect of life, from the Lord's grand strategies to the servants' daily prayers. Step inside the chapel. The air is cool and smells of old stone, melting beeswax, and the faint, sweet scent of incense. The chaos of the castle courtyard fades away, replaced by a heavy silence. Light filters through narrow stained glass windows, painting jewel-toned patterns on the stone floor. These windows are not just for beauty. They are picture books for a largely illiterate population, telling stories from the Bible, Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, the crucifixion. The altar is the focal point, draped in fine linen and holding a golden cross or a heavy, leather-bound Bible. This is a house of God, but it is also a display of the Lord's power and piety. The more gold on the altar, the more vibrant the windows, the more it signals to visitors that the Lord is both wealthy and divinely favored. The day begins and ends with prayer. Before dawn, the entire castle community, lord, lady, knights, squires, cooks, and stable hands, gathers for morning mass. Attendance is not optional. To miss mass is to invite suspicion, to mark yourself as an outsider, or worse, a heretic. The service is conducted in Latin, a language that most of the congregation does not understand. They follow along through familiar ritual, kneeling, crossing themselves, and murmuring responses learned by rote since childhood. The priest's chanting voice echoes through the stone chamber, a sound as regular and predictable as the rising of the sun. This shared ritual binds the community together, reinforcing the strict social hierarchy. The lord and his family sit in elevated private pews closest to the altar. The knights and nobles stand behind them. The servants and common soldiers crowd together in the back. In the eyes of God, all are equal, but in the chapel, the social order of the castle is visibly reaffirmed every single day. The castle's priest, or chaplain, is a figure of immense influence. He is often one of the few truly educated men in the castle, able to read and write not just Latin, but also the vernacular language. He acts as the Lord's secretary, drafting letters and keeping accounts. He is the teacher for the Lord's children, instructing them in scripture, basic literacy, and courtly manners. As the confessor, he holds the most intimate secrets of everyone in the fortress, from the stable boy who stole an apple to the lord who is contemplating treason. This knowledge gives him a unique and sometimes dangerous power. A word from the chaplain can sway the Lord's decisions, influence who is promoted or punished, and mediate disputes between rival factions. While he is a man of God, he is also a political player, navigating the treacherous currents of the court. Religion in the castle is deeply intertwined with the violence that is a constant possibility. Before a battle, knights would spend the night in the chapel in a vigil of prayer, confessing their sins and asking for God's protection. Their swords and shields would be laid on the altar to be blessed. They saw themselves not as mere soldiers, but as instruments of God's will, fighting in a just cause. This belief, known as the peace and truce of God, was a code promoted by the Church to limit the endless brutal warfare between feudal lords. It forbade fighting on Sundays and holy days and protected non-combatants like priests, peasants, and women. While often ignored, this code provided a moral framework, a sense that even in war there were rules. A knight who fought honorably, protected the weak, and showed piety was seen as fulfilling his sacred duty. But this official, organized religion existed alongside a much older, deeper-rooted world of superstition and folk belief. Medieval people lived in a world they believed was filled with supernatural forces, both good and evil. They saw demons in the shadows, witches in the forests, and spirits in the rustling leaves. The castle, with its dark corners, strange noises, and history of violence, was a natural focus for these beliefs. People took practical steps to protect themselves. They carved protective symbols called witch marks or apotropaic marks into the stone near doorways, windows, and fireplaces, the places where evil spirits were thought to enter a home. These symbols were often circular patterns, daisy wheels, or overlapping V's representing the Virgin Mary. They were a form of spiritual insurance, a folk magic that supplemented the protection offered by the Church. Relics were another powerful intersection of faith and superstition. A relic was a physical object associated with a saint, a piece of bone, a lock of hair, a fragment of clothing. It was believed that these objects held a portion of the saint's miraculous power. A castle that possessed a powerful relic was considered blessed and protected. The Lord might have a private collection of relics kept in a beautiful, ornate box called a reliquary. He might wear a small relic in a locket around his neck, believing it would protect him from harm in battle. Some castles became pilgrimage sites because they housed a famous relic, bringing in visitors and revenue. The trade in relics was enormous, and so was the trade in fakes. A travelling merchant might sell a splinter of wood, claiming it was from the true cross, or a vial of dust, claiming it was from the tomb of a saint. For the people of the castle, the line between genuine faith and desperate superstition was often blurred. The religious calendar dictated the rhythm of life. The year was marked by a series of holy days and festivals. Christmas and Easter were the most important, celebrated with elaborate feasts, religious services, and a temporary cessation of work. But there were countless other saints' days, each with its own traditions and rituals. These festivals provided a welcome break from the monotony and hardship of daily life. They were times of celebration, of community, and of reinforcing shared beliefs. During Lent, the 40 days before Easter, everyone was expected to fast, abstaining from meat and rich foods. This was a time of spiritual purification and penance, but also a practical way to conserve food supplies before the spring brought new growth. Death was an ever-present reality in the castle, and religion provided the framework for understanding it. When someone died, their body was washed, wrapped in a linen shroud, and laid out in the chapel for a vigil. Candles burned around the body, and prayers were said for the soul of the deceased. A high-ranking noble would be buried in a stone tomb inside the chapel or in a nearby church, their effigy carved in stone on the lid. This served to remind the living of their ancestors' importance and to encourage prayers for their soul's passage through purgatory. Commoners were buried in the churchyard outside the castle walls, their graves often marked with a simple wooden cross. Funerals were communal events, solemn reminders of mortality and the promise of an afterlife. The chapel was more than a place of worship. It was also a sanctuary. Under church law, a person fleeing justice could claim sanctuary by entering a church or chapel. As long as they remained inside, they could not be arrested. This provided a temporary safe haven, a cooling-off period, where a dispute might be resolved through negotiation rather than immediate violence. A fugitive might stay in the chapel for days or even weeks, protected by the sanctity of the space. This ancient rite of sanctuary demonstrates the immense authority of the Church, an authority that could, at times, even overrule the power of the Lord in his own castle. Thus, the spiritual life of the castle was a complex tapestry woven from official doctrine, political maneuvering, deep-seated superstition, and the universal human need for meaning and hope. The chapel was the center of this world, a place where the earthly and the divine met. It was a source of comfort in times of fear, a tool of control in the hands of the powerful, a stage for the drama of sin and salvation, and a constant reminder that the stone walls of the fortress were not the only defense its inhabitants relied upon. They also placed their trust in a higher power, a force they believed was stronger than any army, more enduring than any stone, and the ultimate judge of their actions in this life and the next. The age of knights and feudal lords has passed. The great siege engines are silent. The The world has moved on, transformed by gunpowder, democracy and technology, and yet the castles remain. They stand on hilltops and along rivers, their stone towers silhouetted against the modern sky. They are no longer centers of military power, but they are far from being mere relics. The legacy of medieval castles is all around us, embedded in our language, our architecture, our stories, and our very idea of what it means to build something that lasts. First, there is the physical legacy. Thousands of medieval castles still dot the landscape of Europe. Some are magnificent, fully preserved structures that draw millions of visitors each year. They have become museums, hotels, and cultural centers. Walking through their gates is like stepping back in time. You can trace the grooves worn into stone staircases by centuries of footsteps, touch the cold stone of the dungeon walls, and look out from the same battlements where guards once watched for approaching armies. These preserved castles are invaluable educational resources, allowing us to experience the scale and reality of medieval life in a way that no book or film can replicate. Other castles are romantic ruins. Their walls have crumbled, their roofs have collapsed, and nature has begun to reclaim the stone. Ivy creeps over fallen towers and wildflowers grow in what was once the Great Hall. These ruins are powerful reminders of the passage of time, of the impermanence of even the strongest fortifications. They fire the imagination, inspiring poets, painters, and storytellers. They are places of quiet contemplation, where the wind whistling through empty window frames sounds like the whispers of history. The preservation of these castles is a massive undertaking. Archaeologists and historians work tirelessly to study and understand them. They use modern technology like laser scanning and ground-penetrating radar to uncover hidden features and reconstruct how the castles looked and functioned in their prime. Conservation teams work to stabilize crumbling walls, repair damaged stonework, and protect the structures from the elements. This work is a constant battle against time and decay, a testament to our collective desire to maintain a physical connection to our past. Beyond the physical stones, the legacy of castles is deeply embedded in our culture. Think of our language. Words like dungeon, portcullis, battlement, and moat come directly from the world of the medieval castle. We use phrases like holding down the fort or my home is my castle without even thinking about their origins. The castle has provided a rich vocabulary for describing concepts of defense, security, and power. The castle is also a central character in our modern storytelling. From the fantasy worlds of The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones to the fairy tales of Disney, the castle is the ultimate symbol of royalty, magic, and adventure. It is the place where the princess is imprisoned, where the dragon guards its treasure, where the final battle between good and evil takes place. Our collective imagination is filled with images of soaring spires, hidden passages, and grand ballrooms, all drawn from the template of the medieval castle. These stories, while often romanticized and historically inaccurate, speak to the enduring power of the castle as a symbol. It represents a world of clear moral stakes, of honor and betrayal, of epic struggles and heroic deeds. The architectural legacy of castles is also significant. The principles of medieval fortification influenced military architecture for centuries. Even in the age of gunpowder, star-shaped forts built in the early modern period used ideas of overlapping fields of fire and defensive angles that were first perfected by medieval castle builders. On a more domestic level, the castle's influence can be seen in a style of architecture known as castle revival or Gothic revival, which became popular in the 19th century. Wealthy industrialists and romantic aristocrats built grand homes that mimicked the appearance of medieval castles, complete with towers, turrets, and crenellations. These buildings were not true castles, but they show how the aesthetic of the medieval fortress has continued to fascinate and inspire. The castle also teaches us a crucial lesson about sustainability and long-term thinking. Medieval builders did not have access to modern materials or power tools. They worked with what was available: local stone, timber, and lime. They built structures designed to last for centuries, not decades. The very act of building a castle was a statement of permanence, an investment in the future, a legacy for generations to come. In our modern world of disposable products and short-term planning, the enduring presence of these ancient structures is a powerful reminder of what can be achieved with patience, craftsmanship, and a vision that extends beyond a single lifetime. Finally, the legacy of the medieval castle is a legacy of human experience. These stones have witnessed everything. They have seen birth and death, war and peace, love and betrayal, faith and despair. They have housed kings and queens, knights and squires, cooks and blacksmiths. They are not just empty monuments, they are containers of countless human stories. When we study a castle, we are not just studying architecture or military history. We are studying ourselves. We are exploring the timeless human drives for security, power, community, and meaning. As you stand today before the weathered walls of a medieval castle, whether it is a pristine museum or a crumbling ruin, you are standing at the intersection of the past and the present. You are looking at a structure that was once the pinnacle of technology, a symbol of absolute power, and the center of a complex social world. Now it is a gateway to that lost world, a physical link to the people who lived, fought, and dreamed within its walls. The great lords and powerful knights are long gone. Their armies have turned to dust. Their political struggles are footnotes in history books, but the castles they built endure, silent witnesses to a world that is gone but not forgotten. They are a permanent part of our landscape and our imagination, a legacy of stone and story that continues to captivate and inspire us, reminding us that even the mightiest walls will eventually fall, but a good story can last forever.